You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Are you tired of this cold weather yet?
I'm tired of the wetness, where it doesn't quite rain and it doesn't not rain. I don't like the humidity and just the sprinkle in the air. I would like it to either rain or not rain.
Yeah. I like a good, heavy, cold rain.
Yes.
But I will say this when did we get that hard freeze?
The horrible one,
Yeah.
the ice apocalypse.
It was last
That
Monday?
was 21. That was
No, this past week.
Oh, that one, yes.
This one was like a little mini.
Yeah, this was just a little frost.
Like for the night, I ended up I would go to some friend's house. I got a friend of mine who every now and then we do cake and coffee, which at 47 is reasonable to do, I guess. But I ended up driving home, and it must have been like 9 o'clock at night. I don't know if you know where the IKEA is on 35 in San Antonio.
Yes.
Right in front of that, I hit some black ice. Oof. And I was in the far right lane. I started going to the left, and then I kind of cut the wheel real hard right to the right. And luckily, nobody was around me because I was sideways completely. And then finally, I started turning back around, and I started going back to the right lane. And right before I got to the wall, the tires caught.
Oh.
And so I straightened back out and, called 911. They already knew about it. But that's the first time I ever really hit a patch of ice. And it was less fun than what you would expect.
Yes. I would imagine terrifying.
Oh, I was so scared. I called my wife. She was with some friends, and I was like, you need to get home because it's getting
worse.
bad. Yeah. And then, down here in Texas, let me tell you something. I'm going to get a little ornery right now. When people go, oh, everybody in Texas is freaking out because it got cold and it's 29 degrees. Actually, it was like 17. I tell those people who are probably typically Yankees, hey, wait till it's 98 and you're freaking out. You can't do 107 like we're doing. So it's just the area. I was talking to a friend of mine. She's like, I've been in Alaska. And I'm like, we're not in Alaska. We're in South Texas. And 17 is ridiculous. But
Exactly. No, listen, I'm born and raised in South Texas. I'm not built for this.
Yeah, me neither.
I'm not built for it. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I don't know how to drive in the snow or ice.
I'm the same way.
I don't know how.
We're sun people.
Exactly. I don't know how to do it.
Well, Tiffany McWilliams, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you making the drive in this kind of crummy weather. So,
No problem. I appreciate it.
I wanted to talk to you. You're running for a district attorney down in District 156.
Correct.
Right? I did some reading last night. So.
Yes.
That's B, Live Oak, and McMullen counties, correct?
Correct.
And you've been working down there already for several years, right? As an assistant, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm the first assistant district attorney, which means there are other assistant district attorneys that I supervise. But I've been there. Originally, I got there in 2007 when I married my husband, who's from George West. Started working at that particular office, but it was under the prior elected district attorney, Martha Warner. So now I'm under the current district attorney, which is Jose Aliceda.
How many, assistants are there in total? And I guess what kind of caseload do you guys have throughout a year?
In total, including myself, there are 3 other attorneys. So the elected district attorney has 4 assistants. And the caseload varies. It's a couple of hundred per assistant. They each have a couple of hundred cases. But it does it ebbs and flows, specifically with the smuggling, that we have in McMullen and Live Oak County. We have that, which occurs in B County, but it's at a lesser amount. But Live Oak and McMullen are hit pretty hard. And because we have 3 counties and our district judges have 5 counties.
Okay.
They also, in addition to our 3 counties, have Aransas and San Patricio counties that they preside over as well. So our court calendar's made a year in advance, and each county's given a certain number of jury trial dates.
Oh, got you.
Ahead of time. And historically, McMullen County, for instance, has been it's a very small population. It may have a large land mass, but it's very few people reside there. And historically, we would have very few felony offenses, which is the only thing we handle. We don't do misdemeanors. We only handle felony offenses. But with the onslaught of smuggling that we've had in the community, it's high-speed chases, fencing getting knocked down and driven through. Ranchers are really adversely affected, the numbers have skyrocketed. When I started in 2007, there were occasions where the grand jury would be impaneled in McMullen County and we would never meet because we had no cases to present to them. But that's quite different now. And so we have a very high caseload and only 4 jury trials a year in McMullen County. So those cases can't get resolved just because there's so few opportunities to resolve them with a trial. Can they
increase those jury dates, I guess?
They can. It's up to the district judges. And again, they've got to, if they give us a trial week, what they're likely doing is taking a trial week from another jurisdiction. So it's just been difficult to manage it. But they have added on, we've had special called jury weeks in McMullen County specifically for that reason, to try to move some cases.
Why do you think it's higher in Live Oak and McMullen as opposed to B? I've always kind of, it's always kind of been said how, you've got 59 that runs from Laredo to Houston, and then 281 that runs from the Valley to San Antonio, and both those go right through George West, Is that part of the reason, or are they just, I guess maybe law enforcement presence there is not as great as maybe in Beeville, or is it a combination of things? What is that?
I think that it is location. Yes, it's the highways make a difference. But in Live Oak and McMullen, they feel that they're in a more rural area than, even though B County is rural, it's not as rural as Live Oak and McMullen. And there's not as much of a presence on the highways for that interdiction as there is in McMullen and Live Oak. I mean, McMullen, gosh, I don't even remember how many, they've got, I don't know, like 15 or 17 deputies. So for a very small population, the number of deputies. I was going to
say, that sounds high.
It's really high. Yes, exactly. It's like, so they have a lot of manpower out. And again, it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of being able to dedicate your law enforcement to look for it and or to respond to it. And we don't necessarily have that as much in B County. They're off doing other things, whereas in McMullen County, there's not as much. Again, usually we never even had to impanel the grand. After impaneling, we never had to meet.
Yeah.
Because there just weren't that many. It is the free state of McMullen County. So they would handle things in-house, I think.
Yeah. One thing that I found interesting, and I've had conversations with folks down there, is, you have your bailouts, you have your high-speed chases, and it might be a no-brainer, but you're probably exposed to it way more than what I am. But it's I always found it interesting because we got to a point, and I disagree with it wholeheartedly, but the way the border is being treated. But we get to the point where literally somebody who's come in over illegally, they just need to turn themselves into Border Patrol. So I always found it interesting how, even though that was going on, we still had high-speed chases and bailouts. And, in my mind, I always just figured these are people that are really up to no good, right? Because if your intent is to get into the country illegally, just go turn yourself in, because they're not shooing you away.
I agree.
So if you're running through fences and you're running through ranches, you're probably that percentage of a border crosser that is up to illegal activity. Is that kind of...
Oh, for sure.
accurate?
It's well known, and we know by the backlog at the border of persons waiting to do just that. There's people in, thousands waiting down there to turn themselves in to a port of entry and to Border Patrol. So my point is, we know word's gotten out that you simply just have to come here and present yourself and you're going to be allowed in. That's the policy now. It's an open border and you can just come in. So you do have to question, well, why wouldn't you do that? Like, why are you being secreted in? Now, I mean, obviously we have individuals that have criminal histories, they're gang members, they've got warrants, things like that. But also I think part of it is just simply there are some people that just don't want to be on the grid. They don't want to be known. They don't want to be tracked. They don't want to have to do like the rest of us and frankly pay taxes, things like that. I agree. There just can't be a good reason when you can come in and present yourself and walk right in. It's so much easier than it has been historically. Now obviously there's still going to be a delay to becoming, if you're choosing to do so, a citizen, but it's the first step is for them to know you're here. That's the first step.
Yeah. And
I agree, going through the fences, the high-speed chases and all of that, it's totally unnecessary unless you're trying to hide something. It would be the same as a citizen who's trying to get pulled over for law enforcement. We've all been speeding. We've all had like a license plate out or our registration's not been renewed on time, and law enforcement's going to pull us over if they notice it. So the normal thing to do is just just pull over and you just take your ticket or your warning or whatever, and you get that issue fixed. So when an offender instead chooses to evade, even if it's not they're smuggling people, but if they're just evading when law enforcement trying to stop them for a traffic violation, that's the first thought that pops into my head is, why did you run? What are you hiding? You trying to get rid of drugs? Do you have a warrant? Have you just committed a crime and law enforcement doesn't know it, but you do, and you think that's why they're trying to pull you over? So it just increases the danger for everyone involved, the citizens on the street, just out driving, taking their family to school or work or whatever. It's now dangerous for them. It's dangerous for law enforcement, and it's dangerous for the offender. They put themselves in a dangerous situation where not only can they get into a car accident and cause injuries or death to themselves, but now law enforcement's on heightened alert. And when they do get you stopped, that's a felony stop. That's a felony takedown. That means they're going to have their firearms drawn and pointed at you. Sure.
And we saw that, I guess, late last year, I guess, I think it was in El Paso. There was a high-speed chase that ended up in a wreck at an intersection, and I think there was maybe one or two in Brackettville, and I'm sure other ones that I don't know about. But it gets real dangerous, and the obvious things are the obvious things, right? One thing that's always irritated me was the fact that we don't do a better job at the border is gonna put John Q. Citizen in a position that they may not necessarily need to be in had we done a better job of securing the border, know. And when I try and evaluate issues or problems, I kind of make them as simple as possible, right? And I've got a sister that lives out in some acreage out in 20 miles outside of town, and it's gotten to the point, and she's not the only one, but most people that live out in rural areas, they've got to carry firearms now,
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just gotten to the point where it's that dangerous, And here's I won't say her age, but a 50-something-year-old woman out in the middle of nowhere, and this is how she has to, go around her property.
Right.
And it's just it's very scary. I even going back down, I left George West. I reluctantly left George West, but I left George West probably in my early 20s. I think I was 20. And going back now to see how different it's, and every place changes. Sure. But it's very different place than where it used to be. I think a lot of it is there's some high tension down in that area, as far as like the illegal border crossers. I was talking to another friend of mine, and he was saying how they had some folks out there, actually multiple people. I'm sure you know several people too, but I won't say his name, but he said he's a white guy. He said we were helping the cops chase him on horseback. He said, and yelling every Spanish word we could at him because we don't know Spanish very well. And he said, turn out they're Iranian. And, I think one thing people still, maybe in certain parts of the state or maybe in northern states, is they still think it's a matter of mother and father and children trying to cross the border.
Absolutely.
And if you're really paying attention, it's a lot less that, a lot more, I guess what people refer to as military age males, you know?
Right.
And that's what people aren't understanding. So as far as, I get that law enforcement is probably maxed out, and they typically are. How do you feel that law enforcement in those three counties are handling that issue along with the border and other stuff that they've got to do? Are they doing a pretty good job, or are they pretty taxed?
I think that they're pretty taxed, but I think they're doing a pretty good job. Our jurisdiction, we're part of, in the 156, we're part of what's called the Border Prosecution Unit, which is a unit that was started by the governor's office for the sole purpose of prosecuting border-related crimes in counties that are along the border and counties that see an increase of border crimes because of their relation to the border. So that's us. We're not touching the border. Obviously, we're a contiguous county to a border county. But that's the point, is those border-related incidents still continue to us. And our law enforcement, so we get funding at the district attorney's office to have two different prosecutors where their salaries are paid for by that grant through the governor's office. One of which is an Operation Lone Star attorney, so I'm sure you've heard that on TV and in the news from Governor Abbott's office. And it has made a huge difference because we're able to not only have additional attorneys, but pay them a competitive salary that we otherwise couldn't. Larger jurisdictions have better funding for all phases of law enforcement. And that means police officers, sheriff's deputies, and prosecutors. They all get paid more. Not a lot of people are rushing down to go, if you're not from there, I don't have a family tie there, to come to Beeville or George West or Tilden to practice law.
Sure.
Like, that's just not happening. So it's made a big difference. And that type of funding is also provided to law enforcement agencies to help them supplement the salaries of our police officers and sheriff's deputies. So it's a big difference has been made being able to pay an appropriate rate to keep these individuals on the road, implementing some safety for us. So and then throughout that border prosecution unit, which is where I was going and I got sidetracked explaining it, we are prosecuting these offenses and we're getting positive results through those prosecutions. The juries are sending a message, and it's a message that's being heard throughout South Texas and throughout the state, because they're seeing down here in our jurisdiction, they actually get prosecuted.
True.
And we have heard, not only have these offenders in court made reference to it, well, this isn't fair because if I was in Houston, I wouldn't be getting prosecuted. Or this isn't fair because if it was the feds,
and
I
they're
wouldn't
right.
be prosecuted. Exactly. They're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so it's starting to get around. And one of the things at one of our most recent, we have quarterly meetings with attorneys and DPS through the Border Prosecution Unit and Operation Lone Star. And one of the things that came up at one of our most recent meetings is the utmost sincerity, the intel that they're getting from individuals that they stop and make contact with in other jurisdictions when they ask, why are you here? Like in Duval County, for instance. Why are you in Duval County? Why'd you come this way? Well, because I'm not going to go through Live Oak or McMullen because they're going to prosecute me there. And that's fine by me. I don't think that in my jurisdiction, I'm only in charge of the 156.
Sure.
I can only do what I can do in B, Live Oak, and McMullen. I can't protect it everywhere throughout the state. I just simply don't have the jurisdiction and I don't have the power to do it. But if the least that I can do is cause them to go around our jurisdiction, then I've done my job. So It's like, that's fine. I'm not going to be able to stop the influx at the border. That's something that the feds are going to have to do. They're going to have to step up at some point to help. And until they do, all we can do is man the ship in our jurisdiction. And we're doing a good enough job of it that it's making an impact. And word's starting to get down to the cartels and to the individuals that are running these loads of people that they need to go around. Because if they get stopped, the risks far outweigh the benefits in our particular jurisdiction. But they're not wrong. Plenty of other jurisdictions don't do it. And I agree with you. You go up to Houston or Dallas, Austin, they do have a different perspective on it because they aren't dealing with it in the way that we are in the border communities. So they look at it like you're saying, it's just like, oh, these are just family members and friends that are just trying to come here to get jobs and work. And that may be for the population that they have. I'm not denying it. They're in a different world than we are.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I was in a couple weekends ago. We went to go watch our nephew play at a state championship in Dallas, and we drove up there, and I had to pee so bad, and so we stopped at a gas station, and we ended up leaving the gas station because there was no way I was gonna get to use the restroom in a timely manner. There was a large blue, very nice, high headroom Mercedes-Benz van that was at the gas pump. And I'm not exaggerating when I say about 30 male, they look Mexican to me. It was like I joked with my wife and my cousin. I said it looked like an illegal border crossing field trip because they're all standing in line and smiling from ear to ear. And there was two white gentlemen, older, one in the front, one in the back, and we're walking them to the restroom. And it was, I kid you not, it had to have been 30 guys, and there's no way 30 guys fit in that van.
Right.
But, that was something where it was like, well, here we are in Dallas. One thing that I think people don't understand is when you hear about Texas shipping illegals to other states, they think, oh, that's inhumane, and they shouldn't be doing that. But when you talk about these areas that they're crossing in, and you've got small towns like Del Rio and Eagle Pass, that are flooded with thousands of people that are basically homeless and unemployed.
Right.
You know, and it's one thing that I've thought about when I just kind of think in general is that's going to contribute to your crime rate. You know, if somebody comes here with the intent of getting work, and let's just say they're here with better intentions, when there's nothing available to them and there's no food and there's no shelter and it's cold outside,
what do you expect them to do? They got to survive.
You know, that's when crime starts happening. You start making criminals out of somebody who, because of a false narrative that there's an opportunity here,
Right.
And it's like you've kind of built that up, and you've got people here. Now, what do you do with them? You know, they start draining resources in these really small communities.
That they don't have the infrastructure for it. They can't support their own population, let alone that influx. They just aren't built for it. That's why they're a small rural community.
Yeah.
Like, they're not. And I think I'm very pleased with Governor Abbott's decision to both bus and fly individuals to locations that they want to go to.
Yeah.
That's the other false narrative, is that somehow these people are being kidnapped or forced to go at gunpoint to get on a plane or get on a bus. That's not true.
Yeah.
They're being afforded the opportunity. Hey, we have vehicles that can take you to these destinations. Does anybody wish to go to these destinations? And they sign up for it. I'd like to go to Chicago, or I'd like to go to New York. And how quickly the sanctuary cities change from, all are welcome, to, hey, this is a national emergency. This is a state of emergency because 34 people showed up on a bus. Yeah. It's the hypocrisy is outstanding. And so it's like, that's my point exactly, is you're right. It is a strain on the infrastructure of that small community. It should be nothing more. It should be no more clear than when they show up in such a large community as Chicago or New York, a very small number, suddenly their whole world starts spinning.
Right.
And if you have all these resources and you want to be able to give them a job, a place to sleep, you want to put them up in the Roosevelt Hotel in New York, do that. You've got the funding to do it. You're New York. Like you said, Eagle Pass doesn't have that. We don't have the ability to do that, and the feds aren't giving us the money to do it. Yeah. If especially, they wanted to give the small communities the money. Yes.
Del Rio's so small.
Yes.
How has, I guess with that, the arresting of the illegals, has that been added to, I guess, y'all's caseload, or is that a separate avenue where now these are different, this is a whole different caseload, and it's, you talked about having four jury dates. Is that part of that, or is this a completely different, I guess, avenue for them to do it? Is it something completely new, or is it in addition to what you already have?
Well, it's in addition. I mean, it's the same thing. It just adds to our caseload. However, we do not arrest the illegals. That is a federal thing. We don't arrest any of the individuals that are being smuggled. The individuals that are being smuggled end up being Border Patrol's contacted, and then they do that thing where they check them in, and if they are not somebody that should be here, they get deported, or they do a voluntary deportation. ICE handles them however they're going to handle them. The individuals that we're prosecuting are the smugglers, the persons that those people are paying money to transport them, and they're the ones usually driving the vehicles or the vans.
So if you get a van full of 20 people, you're probably prosecuting the two main
guys up front. Gotcha. That's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
The other individuals, again, sometimes they might be prosecuted, but that would be for something federally. Now, throughout the Border Prosecution Unit, they are prosecuting in other jurisdictions where they're working this Operation Lone Star, individuals for criminal trespass. So I'm sure you've seen that on television and in the news. That part of the operation has not come to our jurisdiction yet, where we've had to prosecute, and that would be the individuals that are the illegals that are getting prosecuted for criminal trespass. They're not getting prosecuted because of their status as not being citizens. It's not an element of the crime. Criminal trespass has been in the state of Texas since the 1800s. It's an offense in and of itself, having nothing to do with your nationality and whether or not you're here legally. It's irrelevant to the case. Sure. But those are persons that are on land that they shouldn't be on property owners, ranches, all things like that, businesses even.
And damages getting done to those ranches as well.
And that's another crime. Criminal mischief, exactly. That's a whole other crime. So they're being prosecuted for those crimes. But it's a concerted effort through the governor's office and DPS through Operation Lone Star to go to those communities and prosecute them. And they've been working their way along the border. They've not come to be Live Oak and McMullen yet to specifically work that part of the operation. I have prosecuted those offenses as a prosecutor with Border Prosecution Unit in Kinney County, for instance. I have assisted there with the prosecution of those criminal trespass offenses, just lending a helping hand there because they are overrun. And again, Kinney County, if you've ever been to Brackettville, it's a very, very small community. I mean, it's very similar to Live Oak or McMullen, where you've got a lot of land, but not a large population. Yeah. So as a result, you don't have a large county attorney's office. They don't have the infrastructure built up to house all of these individuals that get arrested, and they don't have the infrastructure in the court system to prosecute them all without help. Like it caused quite a strain when this operation started.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of move on to another portion of that, which is, I guess, a lot of the drugs that come through the area. You know, I guess there's kind of this. Well, since I started doing this podcast, I used to work at the Live Oak County Jail. So, and I think I was like 19 or something, right before I left Dad's house, and you know, I've always kind of, like I told you earlier, just been very hard-nosed toward crime and things in general. You know, I always feel like we got to this weird place, and I remember when I was a kid too, where it was like somebody would commit a crime against somebody else, and the news would always spin it in a way it was like, well, why did this person do that? You know, one in particular, I remember it had to have been in the 80s, but it was a guy that had molested a girl, murdered her, and put her on the porch. And this was in Florida. And I remember them saying how he had 28 other child sexual assault offenses. And I remember thinking to myself, he did that to 28 other kids? You know?
He did it to more than 28
He did it to more than that.
Yeah.
But it just always blew my mind how our mentality toward the criminal is now the victim, and the victim just has to deal with it.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I always kind of saw things that way. Now, I will say this: there's certain crimes where I'm like, we've got to take them to the full extent of the law. And then there's other things that I've slowly, as I've gotten older, started to kind of reevaluate my thought processes. You know, the older I get, the more I learn about things. And I get that you handle felonies, but what is your take on, I'm trying to sort this out of my brain, but, you know, when I first started working at the jail, granted it's county, it was, you know, whatever his offense was. But I remember it was my first day, I'm in it was the old jail.
Okay. Yeah.
So the one they tore down, I got a little heartbroken when I saw that.
Oh, I don't know. When I started there, it was the old jail. Like,
yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, no, I'm very familiar.
So I was in the office, and you know, they had this huge steel door you walk through, and there's like this little waiting area. And I walk in, and I turn left, and I see one of the trustees. And it was my uncle, you know. And he always had years of just alcohol abuse.
Sure.
You know, my dad was an alcoholic for a while. You know, he even dabbled in drugs when he was younger. And, you know, I always had a conflict there mentally, because I was like, you know, I had this weird thing that I would tell myself. I'd say, once a convict, always a convict, you know. And as I've gotten older and I've talked to more people, you know, I had a conversation with a guy who's a lawyer, and, you know, he had been bad into drugs and ended up getting help, and now he's doing good stuff for himself and his family. Granted, they suffer, you know, throughout that course of people getting themselves straight. But what can, I guess, legally, whether it's through you guys, I watched that video I was telling you about earlier. You know, they're talking about avenues for helping people as far as, I guess, maybe not so much a drug dealer, but a drug addict get help.
Sure.
What's available to folks, and what is your kind of stance on, because there's got to be a line too, right? It's like if you're a habitual alcoholic or drunk driver, you know, it's only a matter of time before you kill yourself or kill somebody.
Exactly.
You know, and so it's got to be a difficult task for you folks to sit there and go, okay, I'm going to handle this person this way and this person this way, because maybe they have more offenses, maybe they're, you know, I get scatterbrained.
That's okay.
So I always kind of was irritated with like the way public school would do certain things after I graduated, because I think they did a good job when I was younger. But all of a sudden we started painting things with a broad brush. It was what they call it, zero tolerance, right? So it was like, didn't matter if you had done something 20 times or done it one time, you're all getting the same thing.
Right.
And for me, I've always thought that's the lazy way to handle things. I mean, I get when public school, you've got hundreds of kids. In San Antonio, you got thousands of kids.
Right.
You know, you guys have a huge caseload. You have to have some sort of, boilerplate. Hey, we're going to do this. This is kind of our standard, and then we'll work off of that. But are y'all able to sit there and go, okay, we're going to take each case individually, and we're going to handle this person differently than this person because this person has a history of this.
Oh,
maybe
absolutely.
there's constant violence involved as well. How do you guys handle that? How do you evaluate that? And what's available to folks that are maybe not necessarily the people selling drugs, because those people need to be handled differently than maybe somebody who's been addicted. I go back to my uncle who I saw. I see him now. He's an old grandpa and he's doing great and his grandkids love him.
Right.
So at a time in my life where I thought, throw the book out, and it's kind of like, no, these people have redeemable values to them. There's still things that they can do and contribute. And we just have to help them get there, right?
No, I agree. I think as a prosecutor, you literally, we're special type. I go to career days and I explain this to kids. A lot of even regular people don't know when you say the word prosecutor what that means. Mm-hmm. They don't know until you say, "Oh, I'm an attorney." Okay, so what does prosecutor mean? Well, a prosecutor is a special type of attorney, different than every other type of attorney, because we are the only group that takes an oath to do justice, to seek justice specifically. So justice is not a conviction in every case.
Right.
It is in some cases. It's fact specific. It's not always the only right result. Does that make sense? And so when it comes to people that are drug addicts or alcoholics, for the most part, sometimes it doesn't apply, but for the most part, those aren't bad people. They're people that are making bad decisions. And for the most part, those bad decisions are hurting themselves and their family. It's not always hurting the rest of the community.
Sure.
Like you're saying, it can get to a point where it does. It can get to a point where your drug addiction is causing you to burglarize people's homes. It's causing you to hold them up at gunpoint to rob them. It's causing you to assault people to try to take their money. It's causing you to get into car accidents where you're taking innocent families off the road. You're murdering fathers and mothers and children. Inadvertently or not, it's still the result of your actions. Your addiction's gotten you to a point where you're now hurting other people.
Right.
So I agree 100%. What we do is on each case, you evaluate that case on its merit. It's not a broad stroke. It's not every drug case gets X result, or nobody that's charged with drugs can get probation. No, because that's not seeking justice. It needs to be fact specific. If offenders want treatment, we want to get them treatment. For the most part, for this reason, if they are, usually our low-level drug offenders in our community are from our community. Most of the time, those aren't people that are driving through. It's the large loads that are driving through. They're trying to get somewhere else. They're coming up from the border to San Antonio or to Houston or something like that to make a delivery of a large amount of drugs. And those people usually aren't using drugs.
Right.
They're making money off the deal. So when we have low-level offenders that are using drugs, if we don't get them treatment, what's going to happen is you can send them to prison and they're going to get right back out because they parole right away on a non-violent drug offense. It's check in, check out. So now we've made this person a felon, and where are they going to go? They're going to come right back to our community. They're right back here with our families, living amongst us again. Now they're just worse off than they were before because now they're a felon. So it's harder to get work and it's harder to get straight. So we recognize that and we do try to work with that. And all the time that's our position, both through the district attorney's office and through our district judges, is we're going to try to give you as many tools as possible to be successful on a probation to try to get your life straight. Now, the problem with drug addiction and alcohol addiction is you can suggest and you can hope and you can want for someone as much as possible. But at the end of the day, I don't believe it's any of these programs that fixes a person. I think it's a person ready to change their life that fixes it. They can seek out these resources and they can benefit from them, but they have to be ready to do that. It can't be that everybody around them wants it for them. It can't be that their wife or their husband or whatever, their parents, very much want them to get straight, they have to be tired of living that life, and then they can get the benefit from those resources. We have a lot of resources that are available through probation. We also have a lot of resources. Unfortunately, most of the time they're out of the county, which is an impediment to a lot of people seeking them, because they'll be over in Nueces County or in Bexar County. But the resources are there if you want to take advantage of them. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, but you have to want to do it, and then it can happen. In Texas, it is mandatory probation for an offender who's not a convicted felon and who has a what we call personal use amount of drugs. Felony, again, we're talking felonies here. That would be less than a gram of methamphetamine or heroin or cocaine. If you have less than a gram, which is less than a sugar packet, like a sweet and low packet is a gram. So if you have a less than a gram, that's considered to be personal use. Like that's just something you have for yourself. You're not usually selling that unless you have less than a grams in individual packages. You're selling that amount. But if you're just finding somebody and they have less than a gram in a little baggie in their pocket, it's probably for them. So in Texas, less than a gram amount is mandatory probation. The code is set up where it says they shall get probation. So it's not even optional.
Right.
So there are two types of probation in Texas. There's deferred adjudication community supervision. And when you say probation and community supervision, those terms are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. Deferred adjudication community supervision and what we call straight community supervision or straight probation. A deferred adjudication means an offender pleads guilty to the offense. They acknowledge that they did that, but the judge doesn't find
I feel like
them
I've done that
guilty.
with my speeding tickets.
Okay. Yes. That's usually the example that I use for people is I'm sure you've had it where they say, okay, if you just pay this fine and you go 90 days or whatever the amount of time is without getting another ticket, then this one will be dismissed.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing at the felony level. You get deferred adjudication. If you successfully complete that probation, you don't get in trouble anymore. You pay your fine. You go to your classes. You don't test positive for anything. Then that case will be dismissed against you, and you will be able to honestly go forward saying, I am not a convicted felon, because you're not.
Right.
You're not a convicted felon. The alternative is a straight probation where you are convicted. You're put on probation. You don't go to prison. If you fail on that probation, prison is hanging over your head in both of those circumstances, deferred or straight. If you fail, prison is an alternative. Like that's something that can happen to you if your probation is revoked. But so my point is in terms of handling people different. So if you've got a first-time offender that never has been in trouble before, the deferred route is the right way to go because that offender can get that wiped off of their history if they successfully complete it. It can go away. They can take advantage of treatment, write their life, and actually get that arrest and everything off their criminal history eventually. The offender that has continued problems, a straight probation would be the way to handle that because now they're going to be convicted, but again, they wouldn't have to go to prison. They'd have the opportunity to write their life through probation and all of those things. Because at some point, you can't just keep giving deferreds over and over again to people that aren't going to take it because you have to differentiate between the two groups. The people who are, like you're saying, first-time offenders or maybe second-time offender versus a lifetime. It's like at some point, we've got to try something new. Giving you treatment and the opportunity to make the case go away hasn't benefited you, hasn't changed your path. So now we've got to do something to protect the community so that you don't become that offender, that the addiction is so bad you're breaking into houses and you're now assaulting members of our community. We've got to do something to protect at some point.
So typically, do both, probations, do they typically come with some sort of, program or help or something?
Yes.
Typically? Okay.
They get evaluated by the probation department, and they take a number of tests, and they are also getting drug tested. When I say tests, like it's questionnaires to find out if they are an addict and what the level of their substance abuse is, that type of thing, so that they can be directed to the right program. Because it depends if you're like a recreational user, if it's something new, versus if you are a lifetime addict, if you are basically smoking methamphetamine versus injecting methamphetamine. Like these are two different worlds. Once you've gotten to the place where you're injecting yourself, it's incredibly serious. Like your addiction has crossed over to a new arena and it requires much more intensive therapy. So rather than like the first time offender who's able to stay clean during that, what we call the PSI period, which is pre-sentence investigation period. That's where they're doing these tests and they're giving UAs. If they're staying clean during that 4 to 6 weeks on their own, they've had no intervention, they're not in any type of treatment or anything, that's a positive thing because it shows, okay, they've got the willpower to fight this. Their addiction hasn't gotten to such a point where they can't stop. They may not be able to stop forever, but they're able to stop at least for a significant amount of time. So an offender like that would be routed to an outpatient program to maintain that sobriety, where you're just going once a week or once every 2 weeks to therapy, talking to these substance abuse counselors to make sure we can keep you clean. That would also entail AA or NA, depending on what your issue is, if it's drugs or alcohol. The difference is if we've got an offender who during that 4 to 6 week period is unable to stay clean, they're testing dirty every single time they're coming into probation, that's somebody who's going to need inpatient treatment. And this doesn't matter if they're on a deferred probation or a straight probation. If they're continuing to be dirty, even when they know somebody's going to check, that means they've got a serious problem.
Sure.
They literally can't stop. They know you're going to look and they know you're going to find it, and they still did it anyway. Yeah. So they're going to need a more intensive therapy, and that would be an inpatient treatment. And we have all kinds of inpatient treatments that the district courts here sentence individuals to order them to as a condition of probation, so that if they don't go to that treatment, it's a violation of their probation. So again, it's more incentive.
How do you, not you in particular, but in general, there's so many programs, like you said, in Nueces County or maybe even Bear. I don't know about Atascosa, but I feel like drugs down in that area are considerably more available and people are more on them than what they were when I was a kid, right? Which was a long time ago, so that's kind of dumb to say, but so, how does maybe not necessarily B, but maybe like Live Oak or maybe, McMullen's so small, but like how does Live Oak bring more programs to that area? Sometimes I sit there and I go, okay, well, if I'm Joe Blow that, doesn't have a car, doesn't have, has been unemployed because he's been on drugs and he's got to get to these programs, how do you continuously get to your program when it's at least an hour away? Is there any avenue to kind of maybe bring resources like that closer to home, or is that just kind of wishful thinking?
Well, both. Like we've had South Texas Recovery has started a more local organization for substance abuse. We've also had with the COVID onslaught, a lot of our courses now through these substance abuse counselors are on Zoom, believe it or not. And so we've had a lot of individuals on probation taking advantage of that. So like, yes, the counseling's out in Corpus.
The Zoom's a little weird because it's like weird. Zoom working. It's like, are you really working?
Yes. Yes.
I think there's probably more. And, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Right.
But, that having a Zoom meeting is better than not having any meeting, but like I said, I kind of joke about the whole work thing, but it's like, the accountability, I would imagine, is so important for something like that you have to stare somebody in the face and be in the room and smell them. Yes, you look clean, you smell clean. I think you're clean. So many people fake so much stuff online. But again, if that's the resource, that's the resource. It's better than not having it. So,
and again, it goes back to, you're right. Like if they want to fool people, then they can do that. That's where it goes back to that. It's personal accountability. It's, are you ready to get clean or not? Or do you want to admit that you need help or not?
Yeah.
And it's so simple, but it's true. Like the first step is admitting you have a problem. And if they're not even ready to admit that they have a problem, which is a recurring issue.
Yeah.
We have a lot of offenders that no matter how much their life has fallen apart, they still deny a problem. They've lost, and I've argued this in court for why they need inpatient treatment. They've lost their job, they've lost their home, they've lost their children. So at this point, there's nothing you can take from them. You take their freedom, they lost their kids. They don't care about, like, the drug is what's the most important thing. And if you don't intervene, they're going to lose their life because they've literally given everything up.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. I've talked to a few folks. I've talked to Bob. I've talked to lawyer buddy of mine and a few other people, and some of them are not even drugs, it's other criminal offenses. And, the connective tissue is getting to the point where they've hit a point in their life that they're like, I cannot continue.
Right.
And that is, makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because that's the connective tissue to the people that I've talked to. Dad drank a lot when he was younger. Dad had a more spiritual, awakening, and he literally quit cold turkey, which was a blessing for the family. But other guys, it's like, I have a friend of mine that got into a bad fight, and beat a guy up real bad, and to him it was, he got very lucky that he didn't go to prison, but at the same time that was his, I've got to stop this,
wake up call.
And it's hard because I've got a cousin who's, my understanding, not doing very well in that avenue. And it's funny to talk to people who are closer to him than I am, because it's kind of like, oh yeah, he's just, that's what he does.
Right.
And to me, who I'm not as close to him as maybe some of my other family members, but to me, it's kind of like, why do you say it so nonchalantly? But I'm ignorant to the fact that they've just experienced this with him.
They just
for
accepted
years,
it. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, they realize they've tried. Like I was talking about before, you can want it and pray for it so much, but until they want it, there's nothing you can do. And so those family members have recognized that. They're like, no, we've tried.
Yeah.
And he's just not ready yet.
I think a lot of it really comes down to, like you said, wanting to change. In talking to Bob before, one thing's interesting is when you talk to somebody like Bob, or somebody who's been addicted before, it's I think you connect better than you do with somebody who's a therapist and went to college.
Sure.
And I think that's in general for just about anything. When you have when you share a similar experience or hardship,
Absolutely.
There's a little more, and that's why, to me, I really hope more resources become available, because there's got to be so many people that go, I'm not trying. I'll give you a stupid example. Dad had to go to hyperbarics for 80 days, and to get Dad to Corpus every day was very difficult.
Oh, yes.
So I would imagine for somebody who's trying to get off of some sort of addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol, to be able to make those meetings continuously and consistently is got to be difficult.
For sure.
Dad had, a wife and a handful of kids that had jobs and could take him and could afford gas and vehicles, and but it was still a tough thing.
Right.
So it'd be nice if I guess in a perfect world, those resources would be readily accessible. I was in George West, man, it must have been like 3 or 4 months ago. I went to a gas station there and I called my sister immediately, and I said, hey, is everybody here on methamphetamine? And she goes, it's bad.
Yeah. I was like,
And I swear it was from the cashier to the customers. And there must have been 5 people in there. And I looked around.
I feel like I know exactly what gas station you're talking
You
about.
you probably do. And, it was funny because I told my wife, I told my sister, I said, they what I would consider meth mouth. They looked
absolutely.
addicted and fidgety and just strange. And I was like, that was something that wasn't normal maybe a handful of years ago.
Right.
So you're right. There are people in the community, there are people in the area that if they get clean, they can contribute, but they've got to get clean. And so I think that having resources for them is important. But, it's very difficult for you guys to, I guess, sit there and have to evaluate each person. And because at the end of the day, if you guys can put people on a track that they can get better, ultimately they'll make the community better.
Absolutely.
Which in turn makes it better for the kids in the area, and ultimately that's what it comes down to, I think.
Sure.
is I always sit there and go, okay, well, who's going to take care of my mom? Who's going to take care of, our nieces and nephews that are in that area? If it's that bad now, it's got to get figured out, or it's just going to get worse. But it's scary stuff.
It is.
What about, what are some other things that I think that you would do maybe a little differently in that area when you do become district attorney?
Well, I don't think, I want to say, I have seen an increase in drugs in our community. However, I think there's been an increase in drugs nationally.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think it's specific to our area. I don't think it's out of proportion to our area.
Are you seeing more fentanyl in the area?
We are seeing more fentanyl. And we're seeing, again, the meth has been coming on hard probably for at least the last decade, if not a little longer. It hit other areas sooner before ours. But what the difference with meth is, it's just so easy to make. Mm-hmm. It's something that people can do in their backyards and in their bathtubs. And so it just, and it's not, unlike the others, like with cocaine and heroin, those are things that historically always had to come across the border. We weren't making them.
Oh, so yeah, I get you.
Meth is something that's homegrown. It's homegrown everywhere. Like throughout the U.S., it can be grown anywhere. Anybody can do it. Anybody can make meth. So that's why it's so much more prevalent, I think, is because it is so easily accessible, because it's cheaper, because it can be found everywhere. Like supply and demand. Well, there's a pretty good supply of it to meet the demand. So, unlike all the other drugs that I've seen in the over 2 decades all drugs are bad. I'm not advocating that any of them are good, but meth is next level. Meth is next level. And fentanyl, it's not that it's next level, it's that it's deadly.
Yeah.
That's the difference. It's not about you getting addicted to fentanyl. It's about it killing you.
Right.
Like you can go for a long time before you have an overdose of methamphetamine. Absolutely, people do overdose. I'm not saying that they don't, but fentanyl, it's your first time you can OD and die. That's the difference, is it's incredibly deadly. Very little amount is deadly. And what's happening with fentanyl specifically is people aren't going out saying, I want fentanyl. They're not looking for that on the street. What's occurring is fentanyl is being used to cut into other narcotics to make them more potent, for that drug dealer to be able to say, like, I have the best meth, or I have the best heroin, or I have the best cocaine. You cut in a little bit of fentanyl and it makes it more potent for the recipient, for the user. Unfortunately, drug dealers aren't pharmacists.
Right.
And they have no training. And oftentimes, even if they're not intending to put a deadly amount in those drugs, they end up doing so. Either because they just simply don't know the dosage and they put too much in, or I go back to, and I say this all the time, they're not pharmacists. So when they're cutting their drugs up on their table, it's the same table they're using for everything.
Right.
So if I cut in some.
They're not treating it like raw chicken.
Exactly.
And
they're not cleaning up afterwards. So I I cut my cocaine and put some fentanyl in it. And then I cleared, put all that in baggies. And then I'm cutting my meth to put fentanyl in it. It's on that same table.
Right.
So there's fentanyl already there. Yeah. And so that's because my point is, I don't think drug dealers are going, I want to kill people with my product today. Because by doing so, they're losing money. And they don't care about anybody's safety or well-being. Sure. They care about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
And they make money by having users that want to buy from them.
Continuously.
Right. So if they kill their client base, it hurts them in the pocketbook. So I do not think it's their goal to kill them. It's just a byproduct of the industry. It's a byproduct of their ignorance and the fact that it shouldn't be happening, like they shouldn't have access to these drugs. So we are seeing it specifically in that form, is where it's in drugs people are getting and they don't know it. So people are thinking that they are purchasing methamphetamine and they're using methamphetamine, and fentanyl is inside of it. So they're testing positive for fentanyl. But again, it goes back to, I know you think you bought meth from your dealer, but he's not a pharmacist. There's no telling what is in that drug that you got off the street. Same as your weed. Like, you think you're getting weed. You very well, I'm not saying there's not weed in there, but what I'm saying is he's packaging that weed on the same table as his meth and his coke and his heroin and his fentanyl. It's all touching that product. And so when you get it from an unclean source, you're ingesting all of those substances, not just what you think is just the marijuana. You're not just getting that.
Scary stuff.
It is.
Let me ask you this. I've had conversations before. I like having my buddy Gary and Victor in. They do a lot with border stuff and cartel stuff. One conversation that I've had with them before is the concern, and it's when I talk to them, I get real, I wish I hadn't talked to them kind of.
That's usually me. It's never like light dinner conversation.
It's never a rainbow and sunshine.
Yes.
According to those guys, and I agree with them, I understand. And you see it a little more and more. There's more cartel activity over here, and I've often said, the activity and corruption that you once saw on the border, in the border towns on the other side,
right,
are eventually going to end up here and be
absolutely.
regularly. So, how big of a concern is that currently in our area down there? Is it something you're seeing an increase of, or is it something that maybe hasn't quite come through, or is it something that's come through and you guys have kind of handled it well and it's moved on? What is more, I guess, what I would call cartel activity in that area?
Well, I will not say that we've gotten rid of it. I'll say this, that there is definitely cartel activity, and I know it because landowners have told me about it after the fact. But it's a very scary situation where they recognize that there's not much assistance for them. Like the individual citizen down there is kind of on their own to protect themselves, like you talked about with your sister and her firearm. Landowners are in much the same situation where they've been approached and told basically like, we're going to use your ranch for these 3 days. We don't want you to be here for these 3 days. You'll get paid this many hundreds of thousands of dollars to not be here for these 3 days. But you're to not talk about this to anyone. And so they feel like, they don't want to be involved in it. They don't want to take this money. That's
scary.
But it's terrifying that they're being approached like in their home this way. So does it exist? It does exist. But again, after the fact is when I found out about this once they've already sold, which is causing people to sell their land. Like they will sell it and just remove themselves from the situation out of fear for the ramifications, because they don't want to be involved in any of it. But they also, how do you tell the cartel no?
Right.
Like, I'm out here alone. Like, I can't tell them no. It's either they just do it and I don't take any money from it and I just leave for those 3 days, like they say, out of sight, out of mind. I'm not part of it. Or I go to tell somebody in the federal government and then they come down here. They realize that, again, they've been watching our property. Like, they know us. Like, the feds aren't going to stick around here to protect us. And I mean, I say it all the time. The federal government is not your friend.
Right.
And it's not just my opinion. It's true. Like, we're on our own down there. So what are we doing to combat it? There's nothing we can do to combat the cartel. Like, they are outnumbered. We are outnumbered by the cartel, and they have far more fingers in the pie, if you will. Like, they're just everywhere and they're watching us, and they have a vast network of individuals. That's why I get back to, like, we need help from the federal government. They have the resources that we don't have at the state level. We're prosecuting all of these one-on-one crimes. We don't have time to create an intricate network of individuals, like a task force that's monitoring landowners for them, like, and setting up game cameras and intricate networks of that. So that would be something that I do think the federal government has the ability to do historically. I mean, we go back to Pablo Escobar. They had the ability to do it. And, here we are.
It's very scary because, you've always heard stories out of Mexico, out of the border towns, things of that nature. It's very scary to think that there's an entity out there that you just have to allow do what they want to do, because unless, like you said, it gets involved on a federal level, even at that, do I have proof? No, I don't have it. I just have stories, right? One thing that I always found amazing was the Mexican president down there, when he first became elected, he said, abrazos no balazos, which is hugs, not bullets, was how they're going to approach the cartel. And that's telling, right? Again, I go back to Victor, because Victor was involved with a lot of stuff down there. Victor was, he was shot in Mexico working for Homeland Security. He said when he was in the hospital, he said the second in command of the federal police came to see him. He said several days later, that guy was arrested for cartel activity.
Oh, wow.
And it's like when you think of it at that level and it starts creeping here, it's like if our federal government doesn't take an active step immediately, what's the difference between us and them in another 50 years? Nothing. And it's gone rampant. It's super scary to think that, you've got these ranchers that are on an island by themselves,
Yes.
and that's been for a long time. You've heard
Yes.
about that in Falfurrias area, in down south, it's
Exactly.
like, what do you do? And most of these guys have, it's not like they can defend themselves. Most of these ranchers, we get in this weird area where, children of ranchers don't want to be ranchers.
That's right.
They want to go to college and they want to go move to the city. And all you're left with is an older gentleman running several hundred acres, if not thousands of acres, by himself. And it's scary. It's scary that's something that there's not an immediate answer to. So I mean, I don't know. I just kind of went off on a tangent, but that's something that you kind of see in that area. One thing that I tell people, I haven't been in George West in a long time, but the Nueces River still runs through my blood. I still want to see that area do well. I still want to see, children want to stay there, and there be enough jobs down there for people to want to stay and raise their families.
Right.
And there's a rapper I like listening to. He was talking one time about how he was encouraging people in his area to move back home. He says, instead of moving off and building a life for yourself somewhere else, come build on what your family already started,
Right.
And add to that, add to your community, build on what your family's built, and that's something that, granted, here I am a hypocrite talking because I never went back home. But again, it kind of comes down to what's available. Is there work available? Is it a safe
Right.
place to raise your kids? Is there, you talked about law enforcement moving down there. It's like, what can we offer folks? And a lot of that happens, there's a lot more people involved than your office, right? But it's part of it. There's public safety. There's being a good place to raise children. There's a school systems and jobs.
And that's why to say yes, there's cartel activity. I want to be clear. There's cartel activity everywhere.
Oh yeah.
I'm not at all. We don't have a crazy amount of it. I think that we have a really safe community, and I mean that sincerely. I think that everywhere has these issues, and if they don't get addressed eventually, it can overrun you.
Right.
I think we're lucky, though, because we are a little bit farther in. We're a little bit removed from the border, so we don't have the same issues that they do, like in Webb County, for instance. Like that's a horse of a different color down there because they're right there on the border. You go to Laredo. It's a different world. I never wanted to get back to George West faster. And after spending a few days in Laredo, I was like, no, I'm ready now. I'm ready to go back. But I think we have a really safe community overall in all three of our counties. And I say it all the time. When you get there from, I thought I grew up in a small town. Well,
you're Texas City. Texas City's a big city compared to...
That's the thing. I thought it was small. Because you grow up, an hour south of Houston, and Houston has 4.7 million people. So everything that's not that is small, right? No. Then I got down to George West, and I was like, oh, this is what's small. So everyone there in this community, and this is B, Live Oak, and McMullen, they all very much have the mentality of they live in Mayberry.
Yeah.
It's just a Barney Fife type situation. And I tell them all the time that, well, Mayberry's not real. That's fictional.
Right.
That's not a real place. It doesn't exist anywhere. So it certainly doesn't exist here. But we are as close to Mayberry as you can get in the real world.
Right.
We do have bad things happen, and it's the same type of bad things that happen everywhere. That happen in Houston, that happen in San Antonio, Dallas, Austin. All those horrible crimes, they happen in our jurisdiction as well, because there are bad people everywhere. We just have fewer bad people because we have fewer people.
Right.
So there are horrible things that happen, and I'm not going to deny it. But that's why it's important that we have law enforcement that knows how to work a case and a district attorney that knows how to prosecute them to get those people out of our community so that we can keep it as safe as possible. We do have a safe community, and I've been working for 2 decades now to ensure it. That's why people do feel safe when they go around George West or Beeville. They don't feel like they have to lock their car doors or lock their house doors. They should.
Right.
I constantly argue with my husband to do just that. I argue with my father-in-law to do just that. Not leave your keys in the ignition. because he still has a vehicle with an actual key.
I do too.
Okay. Like still has a vehicle with an actual key. Like it's just those little things you can do to help prevent being the victim of a crime. But they still have that small town mentality.
Sure.
And I think that's not a bad thing. And we can keep it. We can preserve it. We truly can. We just have to work together with law enforcement to do so. So I don't want to make everybody feel like, oh, it's so scary. It's so bad.
No, it's
like
not.
I say, there are bad things. And bad things definitely happen there. But we have been fortunate enough that I've been able to work with law enforcement and get the really bad people out.
Yeah.
At least since 2007.
Wow. Hey, you know, it's talking about Mary Mayberry. You should have seen the hissy fit that got thrown several years ago when they added the third stoplight.
Oh, I remember. I remember. It was quite the...
I think I even complained. I was like,
Yes.
now we're going to have traffic. What's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, oh yeah. It was in the McWilliams household. It was like, why do we need a third? We already have two.
Oh,
It's like, we have to, though.
That was rough.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. March, I think 5th is election day, right?
Yes.
This is primary?
It is. It's
Okay.
only a Republican primary race. There's no Democrat opponent in November, so the race will be decided March 5th.
Okay. And how many other folks are running? Not that you need to name names, but...
Just one. I only have one primary opponent.
Okay. And so I guess you can kind of get on a soapbox for a little bit, but what is your intention to how you plan on serving the area down there?
Well, I plan on doing what I've been doing this whole time, and to do it from a position of authority instead of having to be the second in command or just an assistant. That's, you know, when you are, like, I'm the first assistant district attorney, which for people that aren't familiar with it, it's basically like you'd be the chief deputy to the sheriff. You know,
Gotcha.
you're the second in command, you're the vice president to the president, you're the second in command. So you only have that authority, which is granted to you by the person in command. Like the chief deputy only has the authority that the sheriff gives him or her. Like that's how this works. The individual that's elected to the office, they're running the show. Even though you're in charge of certain things, you're only in charge of that which they're allowing you to be in charge of. So what would change is I would finally have the reins to the entire office to run it like I want to run it. I'd have a say in the budget and how that's allotted for both the staff, and when I say staff, I mean like the admin staff as well as the attorneys. That's not something I've ever had a say in. I have had an opinion. I could give my opinion, which was always listened to, but at the end of the day, I made no calls. I got to do nothing like in terms of that. So that's vitally important to me. And the structure of the office is important, like where we're located and how the offices are set up. That's important to me, and I've never had a say in any of that. We do make ourselves available to law enforcement, so none of that's going to change in terms of them turning in cases. I like the way that we set up appointments to turn in cases, because now law enforcement doesn't always like that. I'll be honest with you. They don't like an appointment type situation. They would prefer to just drop things off and leave. The benefit, and that benefits them, I understand, because they can get back to work and get back to doing what they want to do. But long term, it doesn't benefit the prosecution of that case, because being able to sit down and make sure that all the things that are supposed to be there are there helps it to get prosecuted faster. So I don't think that there needs to be a change in anything other than maintaining good personnel. We need good prosecutors. We need people to want to come to work here. And one of the things that we have in our jurisdiction is a disparity in salary, where you can work for the public defender's office as a defense attorney right out of law school and make a heck of a lot more money than you can if you go to prosecute. So I think that that's an issue that needs to be addressed by our commissioners' courts in all three counties. They need to recognize that they're paying the other side a lot more. The chief defender of the public defender's office gets paid more than I do. Their online felony defense attorneys get paid more than my prosecutors do. Their misdemeanor defense attorneys get paid more than any of our county attorneys do. Substantially more, like tens of thousands of dollars.
Who dictates that? Does that come from Austin or the budgets?
The budgets for the defender's office,
Or is that just for your local area?
That's our local area.
Okay,
that's
I
what
got
the B. Live Oak and McMullen commissioners' courts have agreed to pay. Their budget is $1.4 million.
Okay.
Now it gets supplemented through grants through the Texas Indigent Defense Fund. But Beli, Voca, McMullen have to pick up the tab for the remainder that's not paid through the grant. And they've already said that they want more money. So again, they're already being paid better than us. And they've already said they want more money to stay. And so that's something that's important to me. Is
So does that come through, I guess maybe like a tax increase for the area? To be able to fund that more?
Yes. Like the citizens foot that bill for sure. And so, and at the end of the day, all the commissioners' courts, rightfully so, are very concerned with the purse strings, very concerned with what citizens are being made to pay. But I don't think as a whole the citizens recognize that they're paying more for defense than they are for prosecution. And so that's something that's a disparity I would like to prioritize changing. Is I would like to at least be equal. I have no problem. I'm not asking that we be paid better.
Right.
I'm not. And historically, back in the olden days, before we had a public defender's office, obviously the state, the district attorney's office, was seen as the entity with an endless amount of funds, even though we were limited in what we had because we're a small rural community. But you're seen as, quote unquote, you're the state. So you're equated to be the state of Texas, which is this infinite amount.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. But so you've
like no, you have.
There's got to be a lot of people that don't understand that as well. You know, a lot of people. I grew up there. A lot of people like to make assumptions that they know what their thought process is correct, and it's like there needs to be better, I guess, information passed down to I guess the people who pay the taxes and vote. So
right,
and also I guess another thing I want to ask is that sounds very administrative level,
yes,
which will affect John Q. Public. But what else can John Q. Public? What are they going to feel with Tiffany McWilliams, DA? Is it going to be similar to what they've already experienced, or will there be something a little bit different that maybe they can expect out of you?
Well, one thing there's two big things I can say is obviously I've been the one prosecuting all the high-level felony offenses. I do the capital murders, the murders, things like that. And I have been historically doing that, and I'm going to continue to do that. I'm a working first assistant DA. I maintain a caseload, but I'm also going to be a working district attorney. Our current district attorney does not maintain a caseload. He does not prosecute cases, so that'll be a difference. As district attorney, I will continue to do what I'm doing because it's just too important to me. I don't want to hand that off, quite frankly. I don't mind handing off some of, obviously I have assistants, and that's what the point of their jobs is, to help carry some of the burden, some of the load. But those major crimes are still going to involve me. I'm still going to maintain a caseload. So that's going to be a big difference. At least in terms of, it won't be a difference in terms of I'll still be doing it. But it's just the district attorney doesn't do it. And I'll be the district attorney and I'll still be doing it.
Gotcha.
Secondly is the death penalty. We've not sought the death penalty in any cases because the current elected district attorney doesn't necessarily support the death penalty. He is a Republican, but he doesn't necessarily support the death penalty other than extreme cases that this is his wording. So it's not meant to be a slur. It's just in extreme cases where it's something like a serial killer type circumstance. So my position is different. I believe that extreme cases are those that are outlined in the code where it's warranted. Capital murder, if that's something that's the crime that's been committed, then I think the death penalty needs to be on the table and it needs to be up to the jury to make that call. Right. I am not saying it should be sought in every case because it is true that not every case warrants it. But in those cases where it's substantiated by the facts, I think rather than it being a personal stance, it needs to be something that's led up to the citizens, to John Q. Public. Let them hear the facts, and if they decide that it doesn't warrant the death penalty, then it shouldn't get imposed. But if they decide that it does, then it should be imposed. So that would be a difference, is we would seek the death penalty in appropriate cases.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very good way to handle that. You know, I think we've come to a point here, maybe in the last, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, where there has been, I get the feeling personally that there's less of accountability for folks who are committing crimes. You know, if you have no fear of the consequences, you're more likely to do something that harms other people, you know, and I I firmly believe that if you can put that in the hands of the people that live in that area, and let them call it. If it's something that's on the table and it's an option and that's what they want, then let them have it. I don't think that that's something. I've never been the type of person that is thought, hey, the death penalty is too extreme. We talked about the guy in Florida and the 28 kids. It's like when it's something. Now, is it going to be implemented there? Maybe not. Maybe after the murder of that girl back then, a long time ago. But it's like, you have to remember the victim and the fact that whether it's assault, whether it's rape, whether it's murder, you've impacted a family or a person for the entirety of their life.
Exactly.
And to be able to tell somebody, hey, you can go do 10 years and you're done, well, that person's still murdered. That child's still raped, and these things have still happened, and these people carry that forever. So being able to put it back in the public's hand and let them determine what happens with that thing, it's a great way to handle that.
Well, and one of the things, and you hit on it, like hit the nail on the head with it, is our criminal justice system in Texas, because it's different in every state has their own system. Each state has their own state laws, and certain procedures are different in every state. That's why you get licensed to practice in a certain state. So I'm licensed to practice in Texas. So I'm only speaking about Texas law. Right. And in Texas, the system is very much set up where it's all about the accused. The system is all about the accused. It's all about the defendant and his or her rights. It's very little about the victim. Mm-hmm. Now, we do have a statute about victims' rights, but again, that's about their notification and being involved in the process. When it comes to the trial's all about the defendant's rights. In Texas, which I learned this, we talked earlier about the National District Attorneys Association. I went to a training there, and it wasn't until I went to that training that I realized that Texas is in the minority when it comes to something called reciprocal discovery, going both ways. In Texas, it's not both ways. In Texas, the state, the prosecutor, has to give all the information to the defense. They get to know everything. They get to see every offense report, every video, every witness's name, everything that witness is going to say. If the witness ever talks to you again, you have to write that down and tell the defense what they said. There is no such burden for the defense. They can talk.
Why is that?
That's how Texas law is set up. It is not a reciprocal discovery state.
Are there some states that are, though?
Yes.
Okay.
And like I said, we are the minority. Most states are reciprocal. Most states, it goes both ways. Most states, the defense does, in fact, have to tell the prosecutor, hey, these are going to be my witnesses. This is what the witnesses are going to say. It's not that way in Texas. So in Texas, it's frequently referred to as trial by ambush or trial by fire, because you go in there knowing what the evidence shows you. You don't know if he has an alibi. You don't know if he has an eyewitness that's going to come in and say, he was with me the whole time, he couldn't have committed the murder. Because they don't tell you ahead of time so that you can go check out that guy's story and confirm, was he really with this guy? We've had cases where that very much was undone. We had a child sexual assault where it ended in a mistrial the first time, because the defendant brought in all these witnesses to say, I couldn't have done that because I was out here hunting at this lease. It ended in a mistrial, which afforded us a second bite at the apple. If it had been a not guilty, it's over. It's done. Well, for the second bite at the apple, we were able to get cell phone records and GPS coordinates and prove that all that was baloney. They weren't at any ranch. They weren't hunting anywhere. That was a lie. Yeah. If we had just done it just at trial and the jury had bought it, he would have walked. So, but that's just the way Texas is set up. So there's nothing I can do to fix that. But what I can do, and what I've done my entire career, is let victims know that. And I'll tell you, they appreciate it. I tell them ahead of time, this is, you're going to keep hearing, it's all like you were saying, it's all about him. Like, his mom was mean to him when he was young. And, his dad was an alcoholic, or he had a hard time reading in school, or whatever these issues are that somehow is supposed to make it okay that he rapes children. I literally was just in court on Friday having to hear about how, this mitigating evidence didn't come in for this repeated child rapist who has raped children in every single decade of his life. Testimony didn't come out that he was so poor when he was a child that he had to sell pecans. So? I don't, I did not come from money. We got by, but we lived paycheck to paycheck. There was never extra funds. I was never homeless or anything like that, but I'm one generation removed. My mother was homeless growing up. Her mother was an alcoholic and unable to maintain housing. But as the next generation, my mother got a job at 17 and never lost that. Kept that job until she died of cancer at 43. Never lost that job and kept a roof over my head, water and electricity, never had to want for anything. But my point is, you can be poor and not a criminal.
Right.
You can be poor and you're not a child rapist. So it really chaps my hide when people want to come in and cry about like, oh, it was just so hard growing up, so that's why I did this. Because I've seen poor, and my family might be poor and they might have lived paycheck to paycheck. They might have struggled. I mean, my aunt may have had her electricity and her water shut off more than once, and you made do, you got by until it could get kicked back on, but she was not a criminal.
Sure.
So like that is just very offensive to me. One has nothing to do with the other. It may cause you, like we were talking earlier, to go out and steal to eat, to get by, but a criminal it doesn't make, and a child rapist it does not make.
Right. It's so unfortunate that's, I hate to use this term, but it's so unfortunate that's the game that's played. Mm-hmm. I couldn't imagine being a victim of a crime like that and have to sit and listen to that kind of testimony. That's got to be, in addition to what's happened to the victim, now you have the slap in the face of that being the criminal's defense.
Oh, yes.
You've got a hell of a job, Tiffany McWilliams. Was there anything else you want to share with folks on what you're running on, and also share with them where they can find you on your website and social media and donating and things like that, deadlines, stuff like that?
Yes. I'm running on the platform of experience, and like I've said, I've been doing this. I started as an intern, my third year of law school at the Galveston County Criminal District Attorney's Office. I've been prosecuting ever since, which means that I'm in my 21st year now. I have always been a prosecutor. I went to law school to become a prosecutor. I have many individuals that have graduated law school with me and are very successful attorneys, making lots and lots of money, who questioned why I did that then and why I still do it now. And it's plain and simple, it's just my calling. I do believe it's what God intended me to do. I'm really, really good at my job. I'm good at this job. I know how to do it. I've been doing it. I have prosecuted capital murders, continuous sexual abuse of young children, injury to children, smuggling of persons, literally every offense under the sun. And I've written appellate briefs to maintain those convictions to the Court of Appeals. I've argued in front of the Court of Appeals. I've been an Operation Lone Star attorney. I've prosecuted border prosecutor crimes with the Border Prosecution Unit. And these are all things that my opponent has not done. He has not done those things. To use your words from earlier, he's a Yankee. He's a Yankee from Detroit who's moved down here and was licensed in 2017 by the Texas Bar. He lacks the experience. And I do have skin in the game. I've got family here. I've got friends here. I'm in this community because I moved here to start a family with a boy that was born and raised in, he's born in Beeville because there was no hospital in George West. Mm-hmm. But born in Beeville and raised in George West, that's why we're here. We're here because we moved here in 2007 when we got married to start our life. I didn't move here with no connection to the community at all because I decided to get into politics. I'm not a politician at all. I'm a prosecutor. And that's what people will get when they vote for me, is they will get a prosecutor, a lifetime prosecutor who's been doing the job and putting in the work this whole time, not somebody seeking a title. You can find me at, my website is www.mcwilliamsforda.com, and that's 4 spelled out, F-O-R. My Facebook, I have a DA page as well, which is at McWilliams for DA. On that Facebook, I give updates of cases that I've tried historically and recently, just to the community to let them know what I've been doing and the offenders that I've been removing from the community. And the important dates are early voting is February 20th through March 1st. and Election Day is March 5th. It's vitally important that you show up to vote because this is a race that's going to be decided in the primary. There's no Democrat opponent, so you have to show up in the primary to cast your ballot because this will affect you. I know in George West, in Live Oak County, one of my concerns is that the voting public will think, oh, we don't really need to show up because Trump's got it. I don't have to worry about the presidential thing until November. And that's not true. You have local races that are going to be decided on their own in the March primary. So you've got to show up then. I prefer to show up in early voting because if you wait for Election Day, anything could happen. Car trouble, you could be sick, you could have a family emergency, and now you've lost out on the opportunity to have a say in your local elected officials. So I say anywhere between February 20th through March 1st, because then you don't have to know your polling location. You can just go down to the annex and vote. You can go down to the elections administrator in B County and vote. It's just a lot easier. You just go in on your own time, any time of the day, and get it done.
You know, that's one critical thing people need to realize is people think the national election is the important one, and you are so much more impacted by your local elections than what you realize. You know,
Exactly.
you may think Biden or Trump are responsible for the streets, but no, you may think that they're responsible for prosecution of criminals in your area. They are not. It is your local elections that all that gets decided in.
Exactly.
So it's more important than what they think, if not more important. So
right, like they're upset oftentimes at the wrong people. You've got your elected officials locally that you need to be talking to. In B County, we've got a contested race for sheriff, a 3-way contested race. We've got 2 different commissioners up, in addition to some other constables and things like that in B County. In Live Oak County, we've got a commissioner's race, and we've got a district attorney's race in of course, all 3 counties. So you have local skin in the game that you really need to show up for. So, and again, if you want to have a local, you want to have a Texas born and bred native Texan with ties to the community, I am the only candidate. I'm the only candidate with experience and qualifications. So we don't want to be in a circumstance where your elected district attorney's first murder case is your family member or friend.
Right.
You don't want them learning on the job. You want somebody that's already knows the job and has been doing it.
Tiffany, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for coming on, and good luck. And I'll keep an eye on your Facebook page. I like seeing your posts. I like seeing the people that you put away. One in particular was the gentleman with the I guess the murder that happened out in the Clegg area.
Oh yes.
That was that's right down the road from my sister.
Right.
So I appreciate all the work you're doing down in that area, and wish you luck.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.